Hello and welcome to this Kali Fundamentals lesson. I'm very excited to be here with you today. So we're getting ready to jump into services and some of the default configurations when you first turn on Kali Linux. So if you've been asking yourself, how exactly do I go about getting SSH to work? Right? Notice that I don't have anything listening when I do that netstat command at the beginning of booting up. Well, the good news is today we're going to get into a high-level understanding of initial service settings in Kali. We're going to understand and walk away with some service and process management techniques, and we're going to have a high-level understanding of how to configure services. So I'm going to go ahead and pull our lab environment over, and I'm using the Host Data Integrity Baseline Lab. I'm using the Kali machine that they have there to do these exercises and show you some of the things we're going to learn today. So let's start off with a quick netstat. So we talked about that in the last lesson, and that ANTP. So you'll notice here that we don't have anything listening. There's really nothing going on. And so what we want to do is, by default, HTTP services like Apache and SSH aren't enabled in Kali Linux. And that's because if you're going to do a pen test or you're doing some type of forensics or you're doing something of that nature, you don't want your system to be very noisy, and you don't want anything to pick it up on the network if you've got a threat actor or something like that going around and sniffing things. And so we can quickly do a service. So typically you start with service and then the name of the service. So we'll do Apache 2 for HTTP services, and we'll do start. And that'll start our Apache services. And then we'll do service SSH start, and that will start our SSH services. So now, when we do that netstat ANTP command, you'll see here that we've got some things listening. So there's the SSH services, there's the Apache 2, which will be your web server, or the web services. And so you can see now that we've got some stuff listening that we may not want to have listening by default. So very interesting stuff there. So you may be asking, well, that's neat, and you can use that service method. So service, the service name, and then start, stop, and that will stop a service. So if I do service, the Apache 2, and I do stop, you'll see here that it's no longer listening. So you may be asking, well, I want SSH to start up by default when I boot up my machine. I want to use it, every day, and I need that for management purposes. So you can do an update rcd.d there, SSH enable. And now, whenever you reboot the system or whatever the case may be, SSH should be started by default. But if you don't make that change, SSH and the Apache services upon a reboot should not be up and running. Now, you might be wondering, how do I manage, processes and things of that nature, much like you do in Windows? So let's say that I start Iceweasel here. And okay, it's up. Now let's say I've been working in it and it freezes. Well, you can do a PS for process and an aux, and that'll show you everything. That's pretty noisy. You can see down here that there's Iceweasel and the process ID number. Now, let's say you had a longer list than that and you want it to narrow it down. So you can do a PS aux, and then you can do a pipe here, and then you can do grep, which allows you to get information out of files or outputs. And so when I do PS aux, and then I do this pipe and grep, it's going to feed that output through this grep command essentially, and I can do ice. And bang, now I've got it kind of narrowed down to these few things that are associated with ice, and I can see Iceweasel here pretty easy. Now let's say I want to kill that. So you'll see down here that we're still running Iceweasel. So if I do kill, which will kill a process, and then our process ID here is 3363, it's done. It killed the process. So that's a very high level overview of how to kind of, look for processes, how to kill processes if they're giving you trouble. And, you can move through that as you learn the ropes and continue to adventure into some of that. Now, let's do this command again, the netstat ANTP. Now, looking here, we see that SSH is still running, and the program name over here is SSHD. Well, let's say that I don't want it to run off that default port of 22 there. So there are config files, as we had discussed, for each of these services. So if I do, let's see, a CD, and I need to go to etc SSH, which is where the config file is, you'll see here that we have a config file for SSHD. Okay, so if I do nano SSHD config, I can now see a number of different things here. Each of these kind of hashtag or pound symbols essentially comments out or makes it invalid input. So if I were to do something like this, it would essentially make it to where that port wasn't running. But what we can do is, let's say I want my new port to be 2212. Okay, so I do an O or a Control O, and that'll save the output to that config file. I'll do Control X to exit. All right, now you'll notice it's still running on 22, and that's because I have to restart the service in order for it to take effect, the new configuration. So I can do service SSH restart. It will restart, and then you'll notice that my port that I'm running that SSH service off now is 2212, and that's what it's listening on for connections. So at a high level, you know, that's how we're going to be able to manage services, and that's how we're going to be able to start and stop services using that service command. There are other commands that you can use to manage services, managing processes and config files and things of that nature to make changes to different services. So don't limit that to just what we looked at here today. You can do that with any number of config files or other services when you're troubleshooting or trying to customize your instance and its configuration. So with all of that in mind, let's do a quick check on learning. So how would you enable SSH automatically upon boot? Well, we talked about each of these. Auto SSH, we didn't even discuss that. That's not a valid choice here. Service SSH start just starts the service, but it does not do so upon a boot. You have to do this manually. Netstat SSH isn't a valid combination of commands, so that's not a valid answer. So remember, we have to do the update-rc.d SSH enable command in order to start SSH services when we reboot a system or something of that nature. So in summary today in this brief lesson, we looked at how to start the services, how to manipulate services, how to kill processes and check processes that are running on our instance, and how to modify configuration files. And so I want to thank you for your time today. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.